Out of every product that Apple's ever released, few have been as notable as the iPod. The iPod was released in 2001 after Apple was going through kind of a bad time. A lot of people credit the iPod for saving Apple as a whole. So the iPod was always a pretty popular product. This is a 4th generation iPod, I believe the photo model. But in 2001, when Apple released the iPod, it went hand in hand with the, at the time, most recent iMac G3 line. They synced perfectly over FireWire, and this was back when USB was really not that good. The later generation iPods did use USB. The earlier iPods that used FireWire just really interfaced with the Mac in a way that PCs and typical MP3 players could not do. The iPod had a spinning hard drive in them, so it was pretty cheap to manufacture the hard drives. It had a nice display. This is a iPod photo from around 2004, I believe. But the original iPods had a nice monochrome display, and one of the things that the iPod did really well was 1,000 songs in your pocket. So these iPods could hold about 1,000 songs. Later generations could hold way more than 1,000 songs. And one thing that the iPods always stood for was quality. These devices were made really well. It had a nice plastic front, but it's not the type of plastic that's just really cheap. It is a nice quality plastic. And the back of iPods were typically made out of some sort of stainless steel, and it did scratch up pretty easily, but Steve Jobs actually said he liked the look of a worn down iPod. He liked the look of the stainless steel design when it was scratched up. And it makes sense, it does look kind of cool sometimes, but a nice mint condition iPod also just looks really good. FireWire also had a really good power delivery rate, which is something that USB just was not able to compete with. The iTunes software was also really good for syncing music. You could import CDs, and then the iTunes store was what made buying singles a possibility, really. So after Apple was kind of finished with this traditional iPod design, they went on to more compact devices. This is the iPod mini. This came out around 2005, and these were apparently really popular back in the day. This one is the pink 2nd generation model. I never really saw an iPod mini out in public. I saw classics, I saw Nanos, Touches, Shuffles, never a mini. Speaking of iPod Nanos though, there were a lot of them. There were these kind of stick looking ones. This is a 4th gen. There were even these ones with cameras on them, which I really liked personally. There were these 3rd gens, which had this weird small screen. This was the original Nano. It had this nice glossy black front and the stainless steel back. This resembled the iPod 5th generation a lot. They even had these weird square iPod Nanos for a while. People actually used these as watches, and I can see why. It's a pretty good size for a watch. It is just a little bit bigger than the Apple Watch is. And then finally, these were the last iPod Nanos. These were pretty much the best possible ones. I bought this brand new in 2017. It had lightning, it had Bluetooth. It pretty much featured just about everything that you'd want out of an iPod. Unfortunately, these never got music streaming capabilities. What did get streaming capabilities though were iPod Touches. So the iPod Touch was probably the biggest success on the iPod. Just imagine an iPhone, but kinda watered down and really cheap. So this was the first iPod Touch. This was alongside the iPhone 2G and I believe the 3G. This thing was nice, but it didn't really have a lot of features. Didn't have the App Store until iOS 2. Didn't support a lot of things that the iPod Classic did. Just overall, a watered down iPhone. Then there was these iPod 4s a couple of years later. These were everywhere back in the day. Everybody had one of these back in the day. I remember that. These were pretty much just little game machines. They didn't have cellular connectivity. These things were really cool. Very thin design. After the iPod Touch 4th gen, they went on to the 5th gen design, which competed more with the iPhone 5. By that point, iPhones were becoming more of a value to buy used, and people were buying a used iPhone 4 over an iPod Touch 5th generation, even though this was just the better device. This is a 6th gen iPod Touch, and I really liked these, even though I never really had a 6th gen until now. So what ended up happening to the iPod in the end? It really just got replaced by the iPhone. People stopped needing a dedicated MP3 player. Recently, iPods have been going up in value for a lot of different reasons, but they're becoming more popular to see now, even though I've yet to see an iPod in the real world since probably about 2015, 2016. I think the iPod was a really cool device, and I think this was one of Apple's biggest innovations, yes, but I also think that this was one of Apple's coolest products. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, a like would be appreciated, and you can subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And yeah, goodbye.